Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Rasmussen Theater in the National Museum of the American Indian. My name is Hayes Lavis, and I work in the Museum Programs and Learning Department here at the museum. This is the first time in almost 4 years that we've been able to do the Living Earth program. It's been an annual program. It's been virtual the last couple of years, so we're glad you're able to join us live today. Today, we are going to be looking at Zuni Waffle Gardens, Dry Gardens, Contemporary Practices with Reyna Banteah. She is an expert on the traditional practices. She also has a small business that she runs as well. Let's give a warm welcome to Reyna.
Hello, everybody. I'd like to introduce myself in my own language first. Reyna Banteah lechina hom anodi we kwalashi kwe bichi kwe dayan yatok yawan chale. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Reyna Banteah, and my clans are the Crow clan and on my mother's side, and the Sun clan on my father's side. Zuni is located in New Mexico, which is part of the Southwest. Today, I'll be sharing about my community's agriculture practices. So Zuni Pueblo, as I mentioned, is located in New Mexico, and we are part of the 19 pueblos that live in New Mexico. Our reservation is located on the western edge of the state. It's kind of closer to like the Arizona border. We call ourselves the Ashui people. We have our own distinct language, which is the Zuni language. And we have our origin stories that go back all the way to the Grand Canyon. And since then, we've migrated to our present day location. We are one of the 19 pueblos and probably one of the largest population-wise, which is a little over probably 12,000 at this time. Our pueblo is pretty semi-arid desert. It is located in a valley, and we have high mesas all around us. And at the time this picture was taken, we had a pretty annual river that flowed through our pueblo. But right now we have pretty much like a dry riverbed, which only flows when there's really a high amount of precipitation. This photo dates back to about the 1950s, I believe, or maybe a little earlier than that. But I wanted to show you this photo because at this time, we pretty much were living and sustaining ourselves with what the land provided. And you can see in this photo, there's a lot of rooftops that have different varieties of things drying on top. And this is pretty much what my grandpa probably would have remembered the pueblo looking like. And for historical reference, you can kind of see our sacred mesa in the background with the river kind of running along the right side of the photo. I'll be talking about sustainable farming methods that we've been practicing over like centuries. This is a type of gardening in the photo called waffle gardens in English language, but we call them hekowe. It's a type of depression in the ground that captures water so that the plants have the capacity to grow in the harsh desert climate. We also plant our heirloom seeds that are really specialized to their growing conditions. And also we companion plant different crops that help each other out. And also we practice a form of farming called dryland farming, and I'll talk more about that. The Zuni waffle beds in this photo were captured again in the early 1900s up until like the 1950s. After about the 1960s or 70s, a lot of our traditional agricultural practices weren't practiced as much because of decreasing amounts of rain. So we've been experiencing decades-long drought conditions. A lot of our agricultural practices have been changed because of just modern day conveniences, like the introduction of like grocery stores. And then also a lot of our practices changed because people from the community had to go out and learn things like career-wise, like technical training in different cities, larger cities, or they would be sent to different wars. So a lot of our grandparents or great-grandparents experienced kind of like a disconnection from the land for a little bit of time. And in this photo, you can see that there are mostly women that are tending to the garden. And you can see a male in the background. He's fixing the fence that goes around the perimeter. So our waffle gardens were mostly tended to by the matrilineal kind of connection to the household. So the people that caretake the waffles were mostly women and children because they lived closer to the home. We used the clay that was in our environment, and we made use of that to build things like our homes, our pottery, our gardens, the walls that we made. These are small photos of different types of sand and soil we will add to each little waffle square. So basically, I say that we built kind of like little adobe homes for each plant to survive. Each family had their own garden, and they would caretake it throughout the whole season. And there's a harvest season that would the family would share their crops and save some of it for the fall and winter time. These crops included things like chili, beans, cilantro, things like smaller size crops. The amendments that we added to help the plants grow, because clay is, the desert sand is not really rich in nutrients, so we will have to add more things to help the plants survive. So we will add different amendments, things like floodplain sand, which are like small to medium grain texture. If you like see floodplain sand that's all one size, kind of like what you see at the beach sometimes. They're like, if you grab a hold of that sand, you can feel the moisture in it. We added that into the squares to help with water retention and to help decrease evaporation. And we call this sand solsana, which is translates into like big sand. Forest soil we gather in the mountain forest area, and this provided a lot of our organic matter. And we would also call this tanaya soe, which is forest sand. And this also provided like evaporation purposes and helped with infiltration. We added dry aged manure, mostly like from sheep or horses. We call that muhewe. And also the clay itself has water holding capacities that help with the decrease in evaporation. And we would plant things, as I mentioned, like squash and herbs, onions, tomatillos, chili, beans. And the space we would require for each plant was about a 12 by 12 foot square. Things that were like bigger, like pumpkins or melons, would have a bigger square, or they would be kind of mounded up. And we would typically water these plants maybe once a week, sometimes less than that, depending if it rained or not. The women would carry jars or buckets to the river and collect water and take it back to the gardens. And they would fill their waffles up all the way with clay, either from like dipper gourds. We had special gourds, or either like household dippers. They would fill them up and water them with those. These days you could like fill it up with a garden hose, or you can collect rainwater. Where we live, we do a lot of rainwater collecting and fill the water, waffles with the water that way. So the children, they were really important in also maintaining the crops, because they would be helping to gather the water, and their role was pretty much to weed or water. And they had these jars that they would carry from the river. And here's another photo of a child carrying some water. And these pots were also made from the clay that was gathered. You can see the waffles on either side, and there's like a walk path. And the wooden stick fence around the perimeters were to help with like further wind evaporation, because it gets super windy where we live, and that also helps. So each square was watered by hand, either with the buckets, as I mentioned, or ladles, and they would fill it up until it was getting too dry that the plant wouldn't survive, or the rains would help to water the plants as well. These are some modern day photos of some of the community events that I've hosted at the farm that I operate. It's basically a weekend of playing in the mud, pretty much. We have a lot of volunteers that come to learn, because they have also the same similar environments in their own gardens. Dry desert clay soils is pretty much what we work with in New Mexico. So I host these workshops so that other people can learn just to use the things that they have available in their backyards. Here you can kind of see that somebody's watering each waffle with a hose, because the water is accessible that way. There's some photos of some children planting some bean seeds. These seeds are more drought tolerant heirloom seeds that we have been cultivating and protecting and stewarding over centuries. This is the first garden I came across in Zuni when I was helping my family during the summer solstice season. A lot of our community members, they are cooking for different ceremonial purposes. But this is the first garden I came upon where I actually saw the waffle gardens being made, and I was really impressed and in awe, because there weren't too many people in my community practicing this type of gardening anymore. So I took a few pictures just because it was like, to me, it was like really reassuring to see it still being practiced in my community. And you can see things like beans, some chili, some squash. You can see the corn on the left side. And you can see some of the women there by the adobe ovens making bread. Some other photos and different angles of, so depends on the person making the structures. You can make it however you imagine. There's squares within squares you can see in this photo. And you can make rectangle size squares. So it all depends kind of on your own style of gardening. But basically each was filled and the water was captured in that depression. So I mentioned that we grow a lot of heirloom seeds, heirloom or heritage seeds. The definition for that is that it's regarded as several decades old and it's open pollinated and it breeds true offspring. These are the definitions I found online, like of what a landrace seed is. A landrace seed has dynamic populations of a cultivated plant that has historical origin, distinct identity, and lacks formal crop improvement, as well as often being genetically diverse and locally adapted and associated with traditional farming systems. A landrace of seed propagated crop can be defined as a variable population which is identifiable and usually has a local name. It lacks formal crop improvement, is characterized by a specific adaptation to the environmental conditions of the area of cultivation, and is closely associated with traditional uses, knowledge, habits, dialects, and celebrations of the people who develop and continue to grow it. So our landrace seeds are really important in ceremonial purposes and also just for the consumption of those different types of heirloom seeds and landrace seeds, because it provides the sustenance that we need in our own climate conditions. This is an image of the companion planting, or also known as three sisters. Also interplanting of different crops, and also just being mindful that each crop takes out different nutrients in the soil. So every crop is rotated so that you don't deplete the soil in one section so that other plants won't grow. So planting corn, beans, and squash together was beneficial for all the plants because the corn provided the stalk that the beans would vine up. The corn depletes a lot of nutrients from the ground, so the beans were providing that extra nitrogen that all plants need to really thrive. And then the squash acted as a ground cover for further like evaporation from happening, and acted as like a little barrier for animals. I added sunflowers on there because sunflowers are also beneficial to the plant systems that depend on attracting pollinators to the garden, so that the pollinators can go to the squash and the beans and also the corn. And these are a little bit of the varieties of seeds that I've been able to grow throughout the years. There are many different heirloom seeds that the indigenous communities steward. In my community, we've been really trying to get the youth involved in practicing their agricultural traditions so that a lot of these seeds are carried on into the future. We have things like the blue corn, we have things like gourds. These are runner beans that are different colored. We have chili that we cultivate. New Mexico is really known for their chili. And we have a special type of beans that we cultivate as well. This is the Zuni gold bean, and it has by far the most flavorful bean that I've ever tasted. And this is a semi-domesticated tomatillo. It's really small, and it has it's probably like a fourth of the size of a regular tomatillo that you would see in the stores. And all these types of varieties of seeds have all the nutrition that we would need to sustain ourselves. And dryland farming was done mostly by the males in the community because they were situated farther away from the village. We have different farming villages surrounding our main village, and these fields were particularly important because they were situated along the watersheds, the bottom of our watersheds, where the water would flow out into the valleys. And they would be carrying all that nutrition, organic matter from the upper forests, and it would spread out based on how much runoff was coming down from the river. And these fields were large. They had acres and acres of corn, squash, beans, and we at one point were cultivating cotton as well for our clothing. So a lot of our dryland farming techniques were also slowly being lost over like the decades. This is a farming village with all the corn that was planted, and every community member that was able to would go and help each other throughout the season, whether it be for planting or for like weeding, and then everybody would come together again to harvest. So this was more of a community event that people would go to each field and help each other out. This is a photo of some of the corn that has been harvested. Everybody would take all the corn and store it for like the fall time or in the winter time. Another photo of all the corn that's been drying out on the rooftops. When I think of sustainability and food sovereignty, I think back to all these photos of all the abundance that was there when we were really trying to survive. And I think that at some point in the future, this is something that I would like to see again, is rooftops and rooftops full of corn. And our modern day practices, we've been trying to do a lot more youth engagement. So I am a committee member for the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project. We have an agricultural committee team that I am a part of, and then we are really trying to help them be supported in their efforts to help the families and the youth really get involved in agriculture again. So the Zuni Youth Enrichment Project has been doing a lot of work throughout the years to get some funding available to distribute rain barrels to every family that wants one, so that they could collect the water and then use that to water their crops throughout the season. We have a monsoon season, which is primarily from June to maybe like August, September-ish. That's when we get a majority of our precipitation. And right now, I think it's been a little bit up and down. We get some moisture some years, and sometimes we don't get hardly any moisture. Whereas before, it was something that came all the time, every year. It was kind of like we had a dependence on the rain. And so we would also haul water from nearby springs. That's how a lot of community members would help to water their crops. because we don't have enough to water our crops like through the water system that we have. And so we have mulching. So we have shade cloth and drip irrigation to help with that really harsh summer sun. And then also there have been efforts to start teaching the youth in classrooms, and during the summertime to have them engaged in activities throughout the year. There's efforts, I believe started last year, for the youth to start learning more of our cultural like arts and crafts. So we've had mentors that have been teaching the youth how to make pottery, how to weave, how to embroider, and how to do like painting and drawing. And this has been really important and crucial because it teaches the kids that their language and that their culture is important, and that they should have pride in their own community. And so language revitalization has been important. They've been doing some language revitalization in the classrooms, as well as storytelling in the winter time. This past winter, there was a storytelling, and a youth told the whole story, and it was all in the Zuni language, and I was blown away. I can't even speak that well. Yeah, so education also of GMO seeds is important, because we need to know what's out there in the world and what's affecting seeds that are potentially going to be dangerous. So that is important as well. We think that as people start learning more about these special types of seeds, it could be taken advantage of and hybridized, and then we won't really have a say-so in how we are able to steward our seeds. So I mentioned the agriculture committee. We're like a group of maybe like 7 members in the community that have been working either directly with agriculture or other cultural positions. And then the ZYEP have a mobile garden that they're trying to start building, so that they could take it around and show the youth how a garden system works without actually having their own garden. So that is something that they're working on doing. These are photos from a community member's garden. This is their version of a waffle garden, just built in a different style. You can see that they did still a grid system, but they used wood to make their squares. And this is pretty much what a waffle garden would look like without the clay making the walls. And you can see kind of the progression of when they first started, and in like the middle of the summer season, when the cilantro and the onions are starting to come up. And our corn is important in all indigenous cultures in the U.S. and in South America. Our corn is pretty much sacred to us, so we pretty much hold corn at like the highest honor, and each direction, the cardinal directions, like west, south, east, north, up, down, we all have colors that represent each direction. And here are a few photos of some families that are doing their own gardens in their own little plots. And so there have been really important stages where we get the youth involved, whether it be planting the seed and seeing how it grows, all the way to cooking whatever they grow. And you can see like how happy the kids are holding their pumpkins and squash. And that's the end of my presentation.
So we're ready to take any questions. If you have any questions, there's a microphone. Jay up there has the microphone. Please go up to the microphone to ask the questions. Do you want me to stay or do you want to? No questions?
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed the sister plants and seeing kind of the historical stuff versus kind of the newer type of things that you're aiming for. Now, it seemed like you really thought that sustainable agriculture was something that we have to do in our own homes. And so part of this is kind of blending with the U.S. American traditions versus the Native American traditions. And do you see that there's a way that we can bring sustainable agriculture into kind of the broader U.S. Without developing like individual people having their own gardens? Or do you think that everybody having their own gardens is really kind of a key part of sustainable agriculture?
Well, I think it could be a combination of both. I think we're at this point where we are innovative people, at least I think we are, but I think we have to form those connections first with the people that hold this type of knowledge. But also I think it's super important for every family, even if it's not yourself personally, if it's like, I don't know, your brother or your sister or anybody within your family that has a garden, to do a garden, because you will be surprised at the abundance you get from one little plot. And I think that if everybody farmed and gardened, we would have a lot less dependence on our modern ag, which isn't as sustainable.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for this. I'm curious, you talked about, some of the gender roles around farming for women and men, and I apologize, I'm not as familiar with Zuni in terms of other genders, but is there any sort of traditional farming practices for Two-Spirit or other like non-binary gendered folks within the Zuni?
Yeah. We've always celebrated that type of role in our community, and there was like even a sacredness to the people in the community who serve both roles. I think nowadays it's starting to become more like acceptable and celebrated, but in Zuni tradition, we've always had people that served both those roles, and they were really regarded with a lot of importance because they had a lot of cultural knowledge that they took on. I forgot to play a video. I'm gonna play that for you right now.
So any more questions? All right, then that finishes our program.
Honda Civic.
Our program for today. If you want to learn more about them, Reyna will be out in the Potomac.
My name is Zachary James, and I am the Water
And
Conservation Specialist at
thank you.
ZYEP. And I want to share with all of you what we as an organization and what our stakeholders have accomplished regarding health equity throughout the Zuni community through the use of rain harvesting and agriculture.
everybody.
Everybody, my name is Dr. James.
Yeah, and you can come visit our table if you have any other questions.
Thank you.